later of a serial console, right? And that goes via telnet. There is no SSH option to it. So if you wanted to experiment with your code against virtual devices, you need something like this. Again, otherwise it's just not going to work. So for this particular presentation, the only, I think, more advanced concept of Python that's required to know is the class override. So Python is an interpreted language. It goes line by line and allows you to modify pretty much anything you want. If you want to create a list that is going to return -1 instead of out of bound error when you call for an element that doesn't exist, you can do it. I don't know why you would do it, to be honest, but you can. So in this particular case, it's just a quick demonstration. So you have a parent class, and the only thing it does on initialization, it's going to claim that the value equals 5. And that's it, right? And it has a function that says get value, and it's just going to return that value. That's all it does, nothing fancy. But now I override that class with a named child, another one. And the only thing I change about it, I say that now this function, I'm going to return the value +1. So when I call it in Python, right, when I call like P, I call it the class parent. When I get value, it's 5. And if I try to do it with a child, I get 6 because it's 5 + 1. But I have never actually defined the init function. It just took it over from the parent. So now about the proxy. What do I need? I need 2 parts really: telnet client and SSH server. Right? So that's what I'm going to write, and I somehow need to tie them together. How? I don't know yet. So quick Google search, just Python telnet client. There is a telnet lib within the client, within the Python. That's a standard library. And just searching around, I found some class that I just saw this fragment of text. And you can see that it's a class because it's referencing like self values. But I don't know what they are. It's not an example. It's just literally the thing that I found there. But looking at it, it's like there is a target, there is port, there is a timeout, something to do with expect. I'm guessing I'm just going to read whatever is there and expect the values and like some text. And if I find it, I'm going to write something. That's really like basic what it should be doing just by looking at it. And another thing, very convenient place to look for is docspython.org. It just lists documentation for most of the functions, the built-in ones, and there is the interact function, which basically says it emulates a dumb telnet client, which is something that I figured, might be useful for me. So this is just a demonstration of how do you actually access the switch through the console, so you get an idea. So it asks you for username, you put it in, you got password, you put it in, and there you are in a switch. That's all I worry about for now. And this is just my first attempt, what I'm going to try and write it on. And in this particular case, I'm writing on my Windows machine with Python 3.7.0 installed. I don't know why it just happened to be there. I didn't bother changing it up. So I just want to write in something that's going to get me to the prompt and let me interact with the device via telnet, manually for now. So, I set up variables. I do change things up a little bit here. You can notice that I'm expecting another option, right? Not just login, but username as well, because that's what we saw before switch was prompting before. Password is fine. So, I set some variables right there, and I log in and run the code, and I get an error. It tells me that it's a type error and I cannot use a string pattern of byte-like options. So I just take that and search in Google, what is that? And turns out that it just needs to have a byte object instead of string. So Python 2 and 3, they have the strings by default are not encoded in Python 3, so you have to encode for this particular library to work. But you literally search for telnet, that error, and the first link there tells you how to fix it. So I changed stuff up a little bit, and it just works, right? And that's good. That's a good step. I got something working. Now I'm actually going to that particular library. I'm not going to open it up right now, but what I'm looking for, I'm trying to understand how the methods are actually written. So because I need to modify them and, later on. And first thing that jumps up to me when I go to interact is it checks for a platform and says if it's Windows 32, which is actually any Windows. I don't know why it's 32-bit. I don't know. Windows 32, basically any Windows. It calls this MT interact, which is a multi-threaded version of the interact. So that's how it works. That's the code for it. And there is actually not much in it. So what we're seeing is when we start new thread with the listener. And the only thing this guy does, as it seems, it gets data somehow by reading something. And if there is that data, it writes it on my screen. And if there isn't, it does a flush, which I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it just empties the output buffer. But there's not much there. And on the input, it just does, again, the standard read line. And if there isn't anything, it just breaks and keeps repeating itself, basically. Because it's in while one and while one, so it's always going to be true. So it just keeps repeating and repeating. And if there is something, it's just going to write it. So it seems to be fairly basic. And when I look at it, I think, OK, so what I want to do I want to change it up a bit and just make sure I actually understand how it works. Now, the note on it, it's a Python convention. It is not enforced anywhere. But if a method or a class or anything is named with underscore, it means it's for internal use. And in general, you're not expected to be calling it from outside, right? It's something that class would be handling by itself normally. Especially threads, anything to do with threads, if you're not careful, you can completely break your system, meaning you have to reset it. And I'm not talking about Python code, I'm talking about your whole platform will freeze. So in this case, I'm guessing that the guys who wrote standard Python library know what they're doing, so hopefully it's safe and it hasn't crashed on me yet, but it's just something to be aware of. So what I'm doing is going to rewrite it, and just to verify and understand how it works, I'm going to, instead of standard writes out and standard inputs, I'm going to use print and input functions. That's all. That's all I want to do to just get a feeling of what it is. So this is the new code that I come up with, right? It's extremely basic. I literally just change this line and change this line. And that's it. Everything else is identical to what was before. And I run it. Well, this is how it looks like. So it's, first of all, when I log in and type something, nothing appears on the screen. Then I hit enter, and I get this. This is what I typed. Show run, it's short for show running config. And then this line that's kind of looks all broken up. So it's kind of working, but not exactly. So I did some experimentation, and what I came up with was, you know, it seems like there is just no new line character being set, because standard library sys, std, and readline actually reads everything you give it, including the new line character. Input reads everything before the new line character. So I figured, you know what, I'm just going to make something very simple, and I'm going to add a new line right there and see if it does work. And it actually does. I can type in, and it does respond well. The only other problem, like remember how the second iteration of show run was kind of broken up into pieces? It still looks exactly that way when I interact with it. And I was not sure whether it's actually going to be a problem or not, but I have decided to just look around what else is there. And again, I went back to the Telnet library documentation and saw that there are different read methods. And one of them is very eager, which basically waits for longer for the outputs, for the input to be received from the device. So I replaced that method, and it just worked. It was doing exactly what I wanted. So at this moment I felt, okay, you know, the Telnet client is ready, should be good to go. And I moved on to the second part. And the second part is the SSH server. It would be a whole lot harder, but there is just basically, Paramiko is the library for interacting with SSH devices mainly. Again, I've used it quite a lot on the networking side. And there is a NetMiko library that's based on it that specializes just on network devices. But they have this wonderful demo server which basically does everything for you. You run it, and there is a working SSH server that you can connect to. Again, I'm not going to show the whole code. There is quite a lot of it. But the interesting fragments of it, first of all, before I talk about that, first thing I always do is I just run the code and verify that it works. Oftentimes examples of open source tools just don't work. I don't want to be troubleshooting something that's not working from the start. But I verify it's working. It's just some dorky BBS that literally you log in with this username Robbie and password foo, and it displays some message and asks you to input your name, and it tells you I don't like you, shows you your name and kicks you out. That's all it does. But it does it via SSH, that's all I care about. So first thing I notice, check auth password. And there's username password, and it clearly says, you know, if that is a username and that's a password, then return that auth is successful. So that means, hey, I have clear text of username and password of whomever connects to me. That's nice to know, right? I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but it's nice to know. And this is the fragment that deals with sending and receiving stuff. There is a lot of code in between that establishes the connection, starts the listener on the port, and all the other things, but I don't really care about it. Because I know that it works, and all I really need to know is how do I send data and how do I receive data. So here's how the code, that particular code looks like. And what I noticed from it, that it looks like just to send stuff, that variable chan has a method send, and I don't even care how it's instantiated, to be honest. All I know is that if I do chan.send, it's going to display whatever I send it over to the SSH client. And this particular fragment looks at how we get the input. So that just seems like that's everything I need, to be honest. So now the real question is, how do I put it all together? Now I have the Telnet client, and I know that in it I have methods to read and write to stuff, read and write data to the switches, or any network devices, or any device for that matter. And I have this SSH server, so I know that it works. So I just need to basically let them talk to, like, have this code be able to talk to each other, right? So first of all, what I do is I take this whole Telnet block and just copy it over. And I have that particular override of of the class, of that special class, right, that I've created. So I just say I'm going to do something extremely cheap and dirty, and it's not really the best practice, but I'm going to use global variables. So global variables, it's something that you define in Python. It's within the module that you're calling. So like if you call another module, it's actually not going to be global with that, but within the module, global variables are just basically can be accessed from any function. So what I do is I simply say, hey, I have this global chan variable, and for input, I'm gonna copy exactly what I saw in the BBS example. And for output, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna send it over exactly what I saw. And because of all the new line characters that were stripped, or I was adding one, I figured, you know, I'm just going to get rid of that all and hope that it all works. And it actually did. That was the shocking part. That I ran it. I obviously had hard-coded values to the switch that I was testing with. I had hard-coded username and password. And I just logged in with those, and then I was talking to a switch. And it was absolutely shocking to me, because I thought it's going to be like a weekend at least long project, but 45 minutes later, I'm done, pretty much. I mean, of course it's not exactly usable at that moment, but the core of it works. So there were a few main things that were problematic, and I wanted to address them. So first is, of course, you're not going to hard code everything to connect to only one remote device. That's kind of dumb. So what I figured is, because I have full access to the username and the password, I can just parse everything to it, basically, right? So the format is username, add system that I'm going to proxy to, and port, right? And what I do first is that function, remember the check auth password, that was checking if username is Robbie, I think, and password foo, say auth successful, and then, or if it's not, just say failed. Well, I'm just not going to worry about it. Again, I'm going to go cheap and dirty way. I'm going to create two global variables, user and password. I'm going to somehow that data gets over there. Again, I'm sure there's a lot cleaner way to do it and find where in the code it gets called. It just, I know it's already there, so I'm going to go a cheap and dirty way and make sure that that username and password becomes a global variable. And I'm just blindly returning auth successful command. I don't really care whether it's right or not, because I can't really test it at that, in that code, in that moment of the code. So it's good enough for now. And then the other thing I'm worrying about is I just had to write, it's a little bit convoluted thing to just be able to parse out all the data, right? So I don't want to specify necessarily always telnet port. But if I have column, then I need to be able to use a different port. Now, what if I have IPv6 address, which uses columns and separating instead of dots, right? So in this particular case, I said, well, I'm going to make sure that I take the very last value after the column and say that that's the port, and take everything before it and say that that's my IP address. Which is all fine. That means if you ever use IPv6, you must specify the port. Good enough. I actually don't know if it will work with IPv6. Maybe not. I never tested.
Wouldn't it catch the first call? How's that going to catch the last one?
So what I'm doing is, I take this target, right, which is the username. So, so the way it works, I split first. So I have username at system column something, right? So first of all, username may have multiple ads. We don't know it. So what I do is I say I take the last value, so target is I split the username string by @sign, however many there are, and I take the last fragment of it, right? So it's like Eugene at salesforce.com adds, 1, 2, 3, switched column 23. I'm going to get just switch column 23, right? I'm not going to get anything before that. And then I do exactly the same stuff. I split by column, so if I have an IPv6 address, I would have list of maybe 6 objects, right? The last of them would be the port. So I grab just that, and then I join it back, the list, right? So I join everything up until the very last one, but I don't include the last one. And I do that exactly thing for the username as well, right? It's just to not have to fix it later, I guess, if for some reason somebody ever uses it. I don't know what. But so that was one thing. The other thing, and I can't unfortunately show it just because the code does not fit nicely on the screen, and you can absolutely look at the code on the GitHub, is you have to put some while statements around with tries and accepts. So the idea is you, first of all, want it to keep running, right? And if somebody disconnects, you want to basically kill all your telnet sessions and restart clean SSH server so that it can accept next connections. And you want to try and catch as many errors like disconnects or timeouts or other things along the line. And I didn't do that great of a job. I know of at least one error that already is there, but again, I don't think it should be used in production, to be honest. I think you should upgrade to something that uses SSH. But for something simple like virtual device configuration, I think it works just fine the way it is. There are some interesting other gotchas that you might run into. Apparently, when you listen to something in Python, you open a socket, and on Mac or on Linux, that socket is listening all the time, and it reacts to keyboard interrupts just fine, so you can Control-C out of it. On Windows, it locks the Python script completely. The only way to get out is you have to press Control-C. Then you have to initiate traffic to that particular port, and then it's going to sense the interrupt and it's going to kill the code. Of course, generating an ugly error as well. But that's, again, limitations of the systems, and but I don't think anything in that code cannot run on other systems. At least I haven't seen it, but I haven't tested, so I cannot tell you. And I believe that's it. Questions?
I have a question. From Lambda, when I'm trying to do SSH into an EC2 instance,
Yes.
Suppose I just have the, do I need to use the party PPK key, or can I put username and password also?
So by default, I believe EC2 only allows you to connect with any AMI, any standard AMI, as far as I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, will only have predefined user and the key that you provided when you created it.
No, you can create your own users. And
Yes, you can go in later, right? Or so
yeah,
if you created that user, you can absolutely connect as that user later on.
So let me try to explain you my use case.
Sure.
As you know, Lambda has got a 15-minute limit, and there's a limited choice of compute power you can put on a Lambda, whereas that limitation does not exist on EC2.
Mm-hmm.
So I want the Lambda to be the front end for the triggering, and
Yes.
I want to SSH into the EC2,
Okay.
do the job, because I don't have enough resources on Lambda.
Okay.
And basically return a successful.
Sure. Again, you can absolutely do it. You would have to hard code those passwords somewhere, or
Okay.
get them from the user, right? That connects.
Or I can put them as encrypted environment variables, so AWS encrypts them.
Yes, if you want to, or you can have, I'm guessing you should be able to have a role assigned to Lambda that allows you to SSH there. I mean, I don't yes, I'm just trying to understand, you know, I don't know your use case, obviously, but generally speaking, as long as your EC2 instance allows you to SSH with whatever way you want, you should be able to have Lambda SSH that same way, right? It should not care. And again, I don't know what's your use case. You might want even just to do it as a batch, right? You don't need Python for it. For that matter.
No, Python from the Lambda does not support bash. I don't believe it supports bash.
Lambda doesn't do bash, actually.
No, it will. It'll be PowerShell with Lambda layers. You can have any runtime now. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know Lambdas that well, so I can't really comment on that.
Can I make a comment there? Rather than SSH,
We can use SSM also. Which is
yeah, I would highly
what,
recommend
data
SSM.
pipeline.
Or whatever you're doing, just create a RESTful interface on the EC2 instance and do it that way.
Or if you're just running a batch job on a CloudWatch event run on a regular basis. And
No,
you
this is event driven.
event driven.
Are you gonna make, so I have to step out for a moment. Are you gonna make some of the stuff available, the code available?
Yeah, it's all on GitHub. I'll make sure you have the
Actually,
link.
I think you can probably just email the meetup or,
Okay.
right, yourself, actually with that. I'd have to see if it works. I'm not
Sure.
if you can do it, but
Yeah.
or you can send it to me and I'll.
Yeah, it's all, and the same as slides. They're on
They're
in
as well. Oh, that's
GitHub
right.
as well. Yep.
So what made you want to do this? Like, was it something you needed to do?
So, about probably 2-3 years ago, I was working on labbing a lot of network devices in a virtual environment, and I wished I could use Ansible to pre-configure them and reset configs, and I ended up not doing it because I thought it was going to be too hard. And then somebody on Slack, on Network to Code Slack, asked, you know, hey, does anything like that exist? And I was like, hey, I have a free weekend, and let me try and see what the hell, why not? And again, it ended up being a whole lot easier. So I guess the message is, don't be afraid to experiment. Python is super easy in some cases, especially when you can copy paste somebody else's code.
You ready? Oh, you're ready.
Well, I'm going to try this.
Okay. Everyone, George Ricker, he's a technologist at Liberty Mutual in our document solutions team. And actually, I was very impressed when I asked for a bio and a title and abstract. We asked that, and you said it, and I was like, whoa, maybe I should feel like I should be working for you.
We can talk.
Yeah, very impressive guy. So today I was going to talk about, I'll let you take it away, AWS Rekognition and some of their AWS services. I've seen the deck already, it's really interesting, so.
So, I work at Liberty Mutual. We do a lot of stuff with content. So we have a lot of documents and things like that. But one of the things I've noticed is if you read the technology stuff, you see like Tesla, phones, and there's a lot of image data out there. And one of the things I've discovered is, especially like my images, I have no idea what's on them. I've just got lists, millions of documents on my Google Drive, and I have no idea what's on them. And so I thought, well, is there a better way to try and index these things, figure out what it is? Is it a picture of a car? Is it a house? Is it a person? That would at least give me an idea of what I'm dealing with. And so that's kind of why I went out. That's kind of what led me down this path. I did this over the Christmas holiday. My family was really excited about it. And so it took about 4 or 5 hours once I got off.
And how much was your bill?
How much?
How much was your AWS bill up?
It was nothing. It's all free tier.
Free tier.
Oh, okay.
Now I will tell you one thing: if you fire up Elasticsearch, be careful because it defaults to the "you're going to send us all your money" version. And so I actually had it running, and I got a bill the next day for $5,
Okay.
and I hadn't even done anything with it. Oh yeah, make sure you default to the free tier on it because it doesn't.
But that's only for 12 months, right? For free tier?
Yeah, I just generate a new one every 12 months. I got more Gmail accounts than
Oh, okay.
and so, the Economist has said that data is the new oil. I don't know how much I believe that, but data is interesting, but it's really the information behind it that is really interesting. But you're getting it from phones, TVs, Facebook, Twitter, sensors coming in, email. And so one of the things I think that is a challenge is how do you manage this data? How do you keep track of it? How do you index it? And so this little piece of work really just involves how to use AWS Rekognition to index the stuff. And I'm going to store it in both DynamoDB and Elasticsearch. And the reason I did both is because I'm paranoid. And so once I've scanned this whole thing in and indexed it, I can put it in DynamoDB, and if Elasticsearch wanders off and loses all my data, I can re-index it from Dynamo instead of having to go back through the whole image processing thing again. So recognition is a feature extraction thing. It doesn't tell you this is a picture of Joe's car or this is a picture of Bob. It just says here's a car, here's a fender, here's a person, that sort of thing. And so it will break things down into scene and object detection. So if you give it a picture, it'll tell you here are the things I found in it. If you give it a picture and you say find me the text, it will, if there's anything on it like a license plate or you know, a street sign or something, it'll find that. It does facial analysis. It will try and guess age, gender, and emotions. It'll tell you comparison. You can hand it two faces and it'll tell you how identical they are, how much they match.
Can you add emotion? Is that new?
What's that? The emotion one, yeah, well, I don't know if it's new, but new for me, yeah. I just saw it. So, and it'll tell you like it's smiling, it'll tell you if one eyebrow is higher than the other, and if they're frowning, that sort of thing. Video, it'll do everything in video that it does in an image. It'll also tell you that the object you're looking at was in frame 1 to frame 10, that sort of thing.
So when you put a video at say 22 frames a second, it will be one frame will be one picture, so it will be like. What it does, it just goes through and says, here are the things I found, and here's the frames I found it at. But you pay for each frame, right? At 1,000 pictures for a dollar.
I don't know how they bill it.
Okay.
You know, I'm not going to do it anyway. And if you really want, you can give it a picture of a celebrity, and it actually tells you how close you are to that celebrity. Okay. That's just a rough idea of how much it costs just for the normal scene detection, that sort of stuff. So if you go to their website and you go to the very beginning of it, this is a demo page that you can play with, and you can basically upload pictures and try it and see what it does. Things. All the pictures I found were all found off of Google, so there's nothing. Don't worry about anything unless you have pictures on Google. So here's a picture of Steve's car, and here's the label detection. And this is the kind of thing it tells you. But if you tell it, then you run a text description, it'll come up with that over there. And what it does here is this is a word, and then it has a line. So there's three things it comes back with. It comes back with 2 words and a line in the text stuff. But again, it doesn't tell you anything about, well, you know, anything other than this is the kind of thing it's found on the car. It won't even tell you the make. Here's some more things it'll do. It will not tell you it's a red fire truck. I was really disappointed about that. It does know this is a police car, and it's found a bumper in here. Here's what happens if you run with something other than cars and stuff. So it knows it's a person, it's a newborn, it's a baby, it's a kitten. It thinks it's a Manx. It's not, because Manx have tails. It doesn't have tails, and this one doesn't. Because I used to own one. So those are the kind of things that gets off of label detection. Here's another one. The car. These are 2 damaged cars, and it found a person way up there in the corner. It doesn't know what it is. The interesting thing, and part of my use case, is that it doesn't recognize damage. Okay. It just says these are things. It says a bumper and there's a hood, things like that. If you hand it an image, it will do. This is the label section. So it said it's a driver's license. It's in a document, and then this is all the information that it pulled off of that. So if you were in the case of somebody was going to send you a credit card or a driver's license and you don't want to keep it, you could at least stop at that point and say it's a driver's license and throw it away. But if you really wanted to, then you could pull all this data off and scrape it off.
Are you taking questions? You want to
Yep.
Does it give you an indication as to where it found it in the image?
If, I didn't do this, but every one of these things is outlined in a box. So it gives you the XY coordinates for every one of these things here.
Thank you.
So if you wanted to, you said, okay, I want to keep the image, but I want to redact the name or something, it would be easy to blank it out because you know where it is. Here's what happens if you enter the house. Again, doesn't tell you anything particular about it. Doesn't tell you whose house it is or where it is. But it also doesn't have any damage to it, which is, I thought was kind of interesting. So the components that I built this thing out of, it's Lambda, it's Python. It uses the Boto 3, which is the AWS Lambda Code. As an S3, a Dynamo, Elasticsearch, and then the Rekognition. The way I did it was, I'm using a SAM. Anybody use SAM or not? But SAM is a really nice way of deploying stuff. It's much easier than CFTs and stuff. And I deployed the Lambda, the S3, and the Dynamo that way. I also got the trigger on S3 to work from that. Everything else I did through the console just because I was lazy. So this is what I have two versions. I have an on-demand and I have a batch one. This is what the on-demand one does. So you take your image and you drop it here. There's a trigger. Lambda picks it up, runs it through the feature detection, comes back with the features, stores them in Dynamo, and then stores the indexes in Elasticsearch. That's really all it does. What I did in the Lambda, and I'll show you in a second, is I went through and I said find labels, find facial stuff, find text, and then stored each one of them separately.
So in the Elasticsearch, do you store both the text as well as the images, or just the text?
Just the text.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I don't know if I did it in this one or not, but you would also store the you would, if you wanted to keep this image somewhere, you would store the link, the S3 URL to there, so you could go back and find it. So like I said, this is the definition. This is what it does with the on-demand.
So my question is, why did you use Elasticsearch? Why not just DynamoDB and a DAX in front of it?
And what in front of it?
The DAX, it's a Dynamo accelerator.
Well, because I want to be able to search.
Yeah, exactly.
And these variables, and you can't search in Dynamo very well like that. I mean, so that's why I didn't want to. If you have a few images, it's okay, a few things, but you get 150 million, and then you're doing a full page
Okay.
search.
Yeah, that's.
So that's why this is in there. The idea, though, is if you knew, if there was an ID, say you had a user ID, and that's how everything was stored, and you wanted to say, just show me the images for user ID, then you could go right here and get them. If you wanted to say, I want to see all the front bumper, images with the front bumper, then you could go here, and you could get it much faster. So the second mode would be is if you had some sort of CMS system, like your file system or something, and you had a whole bunch of these stacked up, you could run a CloudWatch trigger to periodically go out here and run the same process and get it. So if this was sort of you were trying to put this into an existing system and you wanted to catch up. So again, the SAM template deploys the S3, creates the Dynamo table, deploys the Lambda code, and sets the trigger on the Lambda. And then this is just a couple of scripts that I wrote that I could run over and over and over again. But that's how SAM does it. SAM, it validates the thing, it creates the templates, and then it basically goes out and deploys and creates the stack for you. Much, much simpler than trying to do it anywhere else. So, this is where the code is. It's named Rudolph because I did it at Christmas time. I'll go back for a second, but here is what happens in Dynamo. So you can see I've just got a UUID that I made up. Here's a date and time, and then it's storing this kind of information out here in Dynamo. So, I don't know if you can see it or not. This is the SAM template that's doing everything. Basically, this is creating the trigger for the thing. This is creating my S3 drop zone bucket. This is creating my Dynamo stuff. And that really is it. That's what it takes to create all those things. The nice thing about this is it does all the Lambda code down here, and it creates the S3 and puts the trigger on it for you. So you don't, much easier than.
George, I'm sorry, you said it's a SAM, I don't know what SAM triggers, what's that?
This is a SAM template. This is a SAM. It's an application you can run. It's basically this is just a replacement for a CFT.
Okay, that's what it looks like, yeah.
Yeah, it's their latest and greatest
Okay.
mechanism.
So in a SAM, if you specify the runtime, it downloads and run on the Lambda?
Yeah, basically what it'll take this information, and then if you went and looked at the Lambda, you would see it was configured for Python 3.6. A little bit of the code here. All Lambdas have an inbound function that you can register. And this gives you information about what's coming in. So I'm setting up an authorization mechanism for the Elasticsearch. I'm creating my Elasticsearch connection. I'm creating a new Boto 3 session for the Python in Lambda. It's creating the recognitions link, the Dynamo link. It's pulling off the table. This is actually going out and getting the name of the file, the bucket name, and this is getting the file name. And then this is actually just going to call the detect labels. So we've said, here's the bucket, here's the file name. The reason I'm doing this, I'm just passing in a reference to the S3. I'm not trying to copy the whole file over. It will actually pull that in on its own, which works really well if you're going to run this multiple times. You can just pass it that link instead of having to reopen the file. It says I only want 100 labels and I want a confidence of 90. And so then the rest of it's going to, it's getting the response back. I'm picking off the label name and the value that it got back. And I'm going to go put it out here in my table, which is what you saw a while ago. And then it's going to pass it out to the index, to the Elasticsearch. So that little piece right there will do the labels, and then I repeat it with text and facial stuff and everything else. So that's really all it takes to get the recognition stuff to work. And that's really the only core of it right there. This rest of this is what you do with stuff. And there's no error checking or anything like that involved here yet.
So in regards to the recognition, the training model, is that something that Amazon does not let you contribute to? Or in the case of your picture with damages, is there any way for you to provide Amazon with feedback, like, hey, this is damage, and help build their model?
Well, I found out the other day that they actually do keep your data.
Yes, always.
And, well, no, they first say they don't. When I first looked at it, they said, we don't do anything with it, because I'm giving them a picture of a car, but I'm not telling them what it is. Well, how are you going to train on it? They can do some classification, but they can't really train on, like, it's a wrecked car or anything like that. But yeah, you have to opt out.
Yeah, that's a lot of their services are the same way.
Yeah.
And I know, they'll use it for training, and you can contribute to it. Chatbots are a common example with Lex. If you have a bunch of words that their model didn't know and they keep getting repeated, that model will learn from what people said to your thing. So I'd be curious what they're doing behind the scenes to see if they're learning.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, when they told me they were copying the data, they'll actually take it and keep it. And copy it somewhere else, and that probably is going to give people a lot of cause for.
Yeah,
But
so,
if they do an opt-out, they'll delete it. Or
If
there's no way to
if they
opt
opt out, they'll delete it.
yeah, but you lose the ability of it to learn from that data and potentially better serve you
Yeah.
in the
So
future.
is
Yeah.
it like difficult to get an opt-out? Like, is it like Facebook or?
I got an email from an AWS person that said, send us your name, the account number, and the reason why you want to get out of it. And they'll do it.
They usually
Okay.
make it pretty hard to find.
So it's an email, it's not you participate.
Yeah. For me, it was no big deal. I don't care. I'm not using it anyway. But for another company, it might be a little more formal than just an email.
Why'd you go with Python? Was it just there was a lot of documentation? Is it what you know?
It's what I know. It spins up fast in Lambda. Most of the Lambda stuff I've written can be in and out before Java ever even gets going.
Yeah, I was just curious.
And yeah, I just don't know enough Node to. I could still be here trying to learn Node. Plus, you have to download every npm package in the planet to get Node to work, right?
So Sam should handle that.
It would, yeah, it would, yeah.
So it would do the package handling, and the AWS SDK comes in the native Amazon runtime, so you don't have to install that, and that is the Boto 3 equivalent.
Right.
So for most of what you did, you might not have needed to install anything.
Yeah, no, for this I didn't add anything on my
Yeah.
own. I just packaged up the zip file of the stuff and it worked. So this is a sample of what Elasticsearch does. Again, this is the ID. So if you came in here and said, I want to find everything in labels with a newborn, it would return you a list of all of them, and you have the ID there. And then you could maybe use the ID to go find where the URL for the S3 or something like that was. So my use case, and it turned out I actually was at a Toyota dealer last weekend, and I talked to an IT guy at Toyota in Maine, and they might actually find this useful. So you've got an auto repair.
You're not going anywhere, pal.
We seem to talk. You want to join a startup? So anyway, the made-up case is you've got metadata of name, date, car, model. You've got damage. You know what kind of damage it is, and you've got a cost, and you've got a picture of the car. But as the dealer, you can't do it. You can't search it. You can just go in and say, I've got, 1 million cars I've repaired in the last year, but I can't tell you which ones have, where the pictures are and things. And so you might go in and query the metadata for repairs, and it comes back with, 100 images, and you have to look through each one to find out what it is. And then the idea of, could we automate the estimation process? So customer comes in with a Chevy truck, has hail damage. You send it, you do the Elasticsearch to query for a specific image for a windshield because it's hail damage. And then it's going to return you all of that image, but then it's going to go back out to the metadata and pull in the invoice information back off of that. Now, you can go out and you can query this invoice. Now you can come back and say, we've got 100 of these windshield damages of hail, and the average cost is $100 to fix them. Okay, and you've only done that from the image. And so one of the things then, the next step beyond that would be to take every image that you have and the metadata and to retrain it. And I actually started playing around with TensorFlow to do this. And so then the idea is if you train it and said these pictures are hail damage or bumper damage or something like that, and you had a cost with it, now what happens is the customer sends in a picture of their car and the system can come back and automatically just tell you, here's what it's going to cost.
So you said you train it. How does that work?
Well, you've got all, the dealership has all the images, okay? We've indexed them. And so we said, here's an image, and it has a bumper and a windshield on it. And here's the metadata that says the damage was hail damage, okay? So you're going to train the neural net to say these pictures with this kind of thing is bumper damage, okay? So what will happen then is it will learn, and if you had enough of them, eventually if you gave it a picture of a thing with hail damage or bumper damage, it would be able to say, that's what this is, based off of what I've seen. It's relatively easy to do that with TensorFlow. So I just haven't had a lot of time to do it yet. But the thing is, when you train it, you have to take bumper damage and assign a number to it. And all those features have to have a number to them because you can't give it text. It doesn't train off of text. So that's about how long it took. I had to stop and open Christmas presents, all that crap. It's named Rudolph again because of the holiday stuff, and I'll send out the link. It's not code, it's not production code by any stretch of the imagination. And then I wrote it up, I put it on Medium just for the fun of it, so if you want to read more about it. That's it.